In 2016, it was estimated that 67% of even well-formulated strategies failed due to poor execution. In fact, in the Conference Board's recent survey of CEOs, they rated strategy execution as both their number 1 and number 3 most challenging issues. If this year's plan has to execute, join us for a day on strategy execution facilitated by Chris McChesney, author of The 4 Disciplines of Execution, the best-selling book in the world on strategy execution. Bring your plan and bring your team. Learn the 4 disciplines of execution and apply the lessons learned from 2,000 organizations to your plan. The day is divided into 4 sessions.
Session 1 is the execution challenge, the predictable reason so many people struggle with execution and how those dynamics might be showing up in your organization. Session 2 is the 4 disciplines of execution, the universal principles behind great execution and how to best apply them in your situation. Session 3, defining strategic focus, taking the most challenging aspects of your plan and translating them into the fewest number of executable targets at the front line of the organization. And finally, Session 4, getting to commitment, getting people's hearts and their minds, the unexpected benefit of execution, how to get commitment and not just compliance. If you're considering joining us, here's a few thoughts for you to think about, maybe even work on before coming out to the session. First, why does everyone struggle with this issue, right? What's at the heart of the problem with execution? There's obviously a lot of issues around this topic, but there is one fundamental reason for the frustration, and a lot of what we're going to be doing is going to be aimed at this issue. It's associated with a powerful human tendency that in the moment, a person will default to an urgent activity over an important activity, almost regardless of how important the important activity is. And we've all caught ourselves that, what am I doing, right? Why did I open that email? I'm working on this thing that's so important. That little tendency, the reason that tendency is so frustrating to execution is because anything you are trying to execute on, any objective, priority, in the moment, it will not feel as urgent to people as the day job, right? As all of the things you have to do every day just to maintain the operation, what we call the whirlwind. There is always conflict between these two forces. Both are absolutely necessary, but they are not the same and they don't get along. They compete for time, energy, and attention, and you know which one dominates. And whether you're aware of this issue or not, you are dealing with it. Nobody gets a pass on this one. Think about the last major initiative that you watched die, right? How did the end come? When it finally died, did it go down with a big, loud, embarrassing crash? Or did this thing die slowly and quietly like it was being suffocated? Early on, we started to realize that the real trick with execution wasn't just executing the goal. It was whether you could execute the goal in the middle of the 100-mile-an-hour whirlwind. Execution does not like complexity, right? The 2 best friends of execution are simplicity and transparency. And we actually think that a lot of the reason for the popularity of 4 disciplines is because it drives simplicity and transparency. Even before getting to the disciplines, I want you to think about a simple mental framework for removing a lot of unnecessary complexity from what you're trying to accomplish. If you look at any strategy or anyone's plan, right, for their operation, you can always see 3 components. Separating these components out turns out to be very helpful because each component executes in a completely different way. The first component is called stroke of the pen. These are all of the things that you can basically do with money or authority because you said so. Think of them like chess moves. They take brains, they take guts. There's big consequences associated with them, but they're gonna happen because you said so. Now, on the other side, that's the day job. That's the whirlwind. That's where all the KPIs live. That's everything we're doing to maintain the operation today. That's being sustained by your existing processes and a lot of firefighting. If our strategies or our plans were only made up of these two components on the outside, the topic of execution probably wouldn't feel that daunting. It's the middle section. That's where the real execution challenge is. Those are those stroke of the pen elements that aren't happening, right? These are things you can't get done with a stroke of the pen, or they're that key performance indicator. They're that aspect of the whirlwind that's not improving no matter how much you focus on it or beat the drum. These things in the middle inevitably require a change in what we're doing, a change in behavior, or worse, a change in habit. And these objectives, they don't get along well with the whirlwind either. Okay? This is where we focus the 4 disciplines of execution. 4 disciplines are not meant to be used across all 3 categories, therefore the middle. Now, what we've learned is that even taking a few minutes and starting to break your existing priorities and your plan into these 3 categories starts to remove some of that feeling of complexity and may even lower your blood pressure a little bit. If you're thinking about joining us, take a few minutes and start to frame the various things that you're doing in these 3 categories. There are 2 things I think every leader basically gets. 1, if we're going to execute, we've got to narrow our focus, right? We've got to prioritize, right? 2nd, there really are 12 things that feel like they need serious attention right now, right? Those 2 ideas create some conflict and some frustration. I hope you feel better just knowing that it's a common frustration. We've always known that the real power behind 4 disciplines was its ability to create focus. But when we pushed on leaders, particularly in the beginning, when we pushed on them to narrow the focus, they buy that principle, but the frustration around the 12 things they've got, that's a real frustration. That's a real dilemma. We started to recognize 2 really important insights when it comes to the practical application of focus. First, that the whirlwind, the day job, is going to take up 80% of the organization's energy before doing anything new, and that's not a passive activity, right? And you're probably lucky at 80. A lot of organizations, it feels like it's even more than that. And second, we started to realize that 4 disciplines gave us the biggest impact when it was applied in the most specific ways. Rather than being applied to everything across all 3 categories, or rather than being applied to the highest level market share, EBITDA type of objectives, that when it was applied to a specific area within the strategy, that's where we got the breakthrough. And so it was getting comfortable with the idea that yes, the day job, maintaining this operation, is always going to take 80%. It's what do we do with the 20? That's where leaders have to exercise the discipline of focus. It's one thing to identify that area of focus, that key breakthrough. It's another thing to be able to translate that to the teams where the actual work's getting done and to do it in a meaningful way. That focus area has to be defined in terms of a clear starting line, finish line, and deadline. Targets really are the language of execution. And when you first look at this, you might think that creating the starting line, the finish line, and the deadline seems pretty straightforward. Be warned, it rarely is. And even when it is defined, depending on the size of your organization, you may still be a fair distance from the front line. Well, there was a simple question that was posed in 1963 by a NASA engineer working on the space shuttle. And for more than 15 years, we have found this question to be absolutely critical when it comes to creating organizational alignment. The question, what are the fewest battles necessary to win the war? Not what's everything we have to do to win the war. For NASA, the big battles to go to the moon were navigation, propulsion, and life support. And just like the big target to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely home, navigation, propulsion, and life support each had a starting line, a finish line, and a deadline. What this allows you to do as an organization is give the teams at the front line the ability to link to the big goal. They have the ability to choose the one thing, the big target, what we call a wildly important goal, that will have the biggest impact on one of those battles. right? That's in addition to their whirlwind. What we're doing here is not only creating alignment, but we're creating a pull. We also find that it goes a long way for creating the conditions for commitment.
Biggest insight from our 15 years and 2,000 organizations is this. The number one driver of morale and engagement is whether a person feels they are winning. Do this for me right now. Go to a time in your career when you were most excited about what was happening to you professionally. I promise you, in that moment, you thought you were winning, right? It wasn't about your work conditions. It wasn't about your benefits package. It wasn't about pay. It wasn't about whether you liked your boss or whether you had a best friend at work. All those things will contribute to turnover. But when it comes to engagement, it's about the work. Without us knowing it, disciplines 1, 2, and 3 create a winnable game. This is a big deal. If you're a leader, here's my question to you. Do the people who work for me feel like they are playing a winnable game?